Transitioning, and the world should see you. Thank you so much.
No
We've been having all manner of time zone difficulty during this hangout, and you made it possible for us to have all the guests we possibly could, and it is
oh,
awesome.
no problem whatsoever. I'm glad I could join and help out at least a little bit. So,
And so I have under you Laura Burns, rocket scientist, because you are actually like a legit you build spacecraft, but that's not why you're here
I
today.
know. No. Do you want me to do like the top three main things I do at the moment? Or
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
So I'll go. Let's see. I have a job where I am a contractor at NASA working on an X-ray telescope with the Japanese. I volunteer at a horse farm for a horse rescue, and I am forming my own business called Omnihedral that is it's going to be involved with board games and gaming, but also using those types of things for education and team building and all sorts of cool stuff like that. We are so new that while we own our domain, we don't have a website yet. So we
That
are,
I understand that problem.
yeah, we are formed officially in the state of Maryland now. Yay! And I have a big order of games coming on tomorrow. Yay!
Small steps. That's all it takes is small steps. Many, many small steps sometimes. So, tell us, you and I have actually gotten to work on building an educational game that I need to figure out how to release into the wilds.
Oh yes.
Um, Tell me if you can what you're planning to do, because educating with games isn't a new idea, but it's been done wrong a lot, and you have thought a lot and told me about how you want to do it right.
So there's just I mean, it's pulling the right ideas that I've had out of the space to talk about. But like if we're talking about STEM and science, it's not just okay, we're going to have a game here and it's going to be really detailed and as accurate as 100% possible as it can be to like what it's like to travel to Mars, because then everyone trying to play it gets bogged down and it gets too heavy and it's really hard
Yeah.
to deal with. But if you do something that's more lighthearted and fun, but has some things in it, then you can actually have people play a game and then step back and go, okay, what did you think about this? What's real? What's not real? And things along those lines, and to try and like boost people's understanding. So it's just not completely the game by itself, but it's also not completely just giving a lecture or anything like that. It goes to that hands-on type of learning and stuff as well. So I also really want to use games for like no one should ever have to do a trust fall in a business team building thing ever again. There are so many much cooler things that you can do to get people working together, or at least to break down some initial barriers that are not
They don't require touching.
don't yes. Or if it's touching, it's like, hey, high five.
Right,
Yay.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yes. And I just want to say thank you, Schmidt family, for tipping. We just got a $20 donation. And for those of you joining who haven't heard what it is you have stumbled upon, this is the CosmoQuest 40-hour hangoutathon right here on twitch.tv. We are working to try and raise, by the end of December, $40,000, and we want to do as much of it as we can this particular weekend, which so far you're disappointing me. But I get it. It's been a long, lean time.
Yeah.
And the reason that we're doing this is we hate begging for money. We're trying to put it all into one big push. And this is the difference that we need between what we bring in on an average month and what we need to pay people for all the hours that they work. All of you are out there enjoying our content, enjoying the things we produce, hopefully learning. And we just want to be able to pay people a living wage to produce the content that we're creating. So if you ever thought, hey, we need more money for science education. This is your chance to put your money where your mouth is and directly support the creators and the scientists who are making it possible for you to map other worlds, explore our solar system, and just learn while laughing sometimes.
Yes.
And Laura is one of the people that we get to work with on a fairly regular basis as we figure out how to laugh and learn, and gameplay is one of my favorite ways.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of games out there.
Fun.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say it's always fun when like we interact through not my main professional thing, and then periodically I'm working on a new project. I'm like, oh wait, there's Pamela there.
Yes.
When we randomly run into each other on my day job as opposed to my 16 other things I do.
Yeah, it's amazing how many of us are multifaceted in similar orthogonal directions. So Larry says, Larry points out that he's learned all about orbital mechanics from Kerbal Space. Have you had a similar experience of?
I have. So I actually did a workshop at the International Space University on board games and science. And I haven't played Kerbal Space a ton myself, but as I was getting ready for it, I played it some. It's actually like, it takes a while. There's a definite learning curve to it, but I've talked to people at NASA who said they did not understand orbital mechanics until they started playing Kerbal Space Program. And then that helped them understand orbital dynamics and what it takes to get something into orbit so much better after playing a game. So that's always extra fun. So
now, there's games out there that are ones about collecting parts and supplies. The gather your things, go forth and do all the things. There are games that are strategic of here are the ways you interact with your environment. Here are the ways that you smite or help your other players. What concepts and what games have you found that are particularly good for teaching different things related to space?
So there are games that you can take and tailor. There's a game called Wits and Wagers, which is basically it's a trivia game, except all of the answers to every question is a number. So, for example, I might say, I won't I have had questions like, how many exoplanets do we currently have confirmed? And then I'll go check what the current number is, which I actually put in the chat earlier. And everybody writes down what they think the number is, but then you vote on who you think is right. Oh. So you don't have to have the right answer. You say, okay, you put down the numbers and then you go, oh, wait, my number is 4 and this other number is 4,000. Yeah. I think 4,000 is probably closer to right than mine. So I'll wager on their vote as opposed to mine. That question isn't a question that's actually in the box, but I'll go and make up questions. So for another example is, what is the temperature that the spectrometer on the Prism project has to operate at? And so I'll ask people that question. And do you know the answer, Pamela?
No.
Do you make a guess?
Okay, hold on. I'm going to thank people and then ask you to repeat the question because I was getting distracted by Ref's Matt donated 100 bits.
Yay!
Yay! And then Aton tipped $25. Yay! Okay. Joy, cool. Happiness. I have no dog. Normally, we thank people by producing a very cute, fluffy, big, dumb dog. But he's not here, so I have to be cute. Is that how that works? But ask your question again, please.
Okay. What is the temperature that the primary instrument, which is a spectrometer on the Prism project, which was also Hitomi, Astro H, and Suzaku, if you want to go back, what does that operate at? What's the temperature?
I want to say liquid helium temperature.
Do you have a rough on how many Kelvin that is? Let's do Kelvin. Just rough guess.
Like 120.
Okay. So you say 120 Kelvin. I saw just a minute ago that Rigel16 said 25 Kelvin in the chat. And Keeper of Maps said 8 Kelvin. So now, if we were playing this game in general, it says, which one of us do you think is of those answers is closer to being correct?
I'm going to say whichever one is the lowest number is correct.
Okay. So right now, with the answers that we have, and Limp Rimble said 1.5, and there is also a 4 Kelvin. So they'll go with Limp Rimble said 1.5 Kelvin, which is the lowest. And
I'm going to go with, that's too low. That's like Bose-Einstein condensate. So let's go with Keeper's 8.
Okay. So the actual answer is 50 millikelvin. Yeah, I promise it's 50 millikelvin. So they have a cryo cooler. Our instrument is actually in testing in Japan right now. And so they operate that down at 50 millikelvin. And so you were closer, but the person who would have gotten the most points with this example is Limp Rimble at 1.5 Kelvin.
I'm now looking up what temperature Bose-Einstein condensate states. Because, like, how are you not... My brain is broken. Okay, I'm going to have to go read about this because I was all kinds of wrong.
Yeah. So that's an example of, it's a party game, but I can use that game by making up questions like, when was NASA founded? How many exoplanets are there? All of these types of questions to teach people different things in a kind of fun way. And then you can also base it off of, like, if I was answering that question, you might trust my answer more than your own. So you might bet on that. But I came up with the question, so that doesn't count.
Dang.
I thought 40 Kelvin was impressive on JWST, and then I got on to these X-ray missions, and it's completely different ballpark.
Yeah. And I'm learning I no longer remember how to convert from Celsius to Kelvin is what I'm realizing.
That works too. There's one of the funniest things I think is there is there's a poster at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, which is where my day job is. And it's next to one of the tanks where they tested the instruments for the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yeah.
And the different paragraphs were clearly written by different people because they have different temperature units depending on where you're reading on the thing. I always comment on it because it's so annoying when you're going through and trying to say, okay, this part of it operates at this many Kelvin, and this part operates at 70, like 80 Celsius. It's like you have to convert, and it's fun.
The Hobby Everly telescope was built in multiple nations and consists of both imperial and metric pieces that they broke down and color-coded so they could figure out which sets of Allen wrenches they needed to be using.
Yes.
The world is a strange and curious place.
So I'll tell you another game that I really like to use at this point. There's a puppy dog.
Yes, this is Eddie. Eddie, come here. Come on up. Hi, do you want a treat? Yes, of course you do.
Yes. So while you're giving Eddie a treat, there is a game called Junk Orbit that is... did you play that one with me at one point?
I played Junk Art with you, and so when you said junk, I aha'd, and then you went someplace different.
Yes. So Junk Orbit it looks like a really cartoony game. But it actually has a reasonably good orbital mechanism to it. So you have the Earth, the Moon, and Mars on the board, and it's a kind of like tiling thing. So it's a modular board. put all of along the edges of the planets and the moon, and you have your little spaceship, which has a special power that isn't completely physically based, but then you pick up junk, and you need to try and like pick up junk at Earth and deliver it to Mars at a specific place. But how do you get there? You get there by throwing other pieces of junk off your spaceship. So I may throw out a 4-piece of junk behind me, and then that lets me move 4 pieces of spaces forward. And so that's how you move around in the game. And then everywhere I land, I pick up a piece of junk, and then I'm trying to like move all of these different pieces around and deliver to them and go to the right places by throwing them around. And let's see, if you hit another ship, then pieces of junk fly off that ship from one of your competitors, and they have to drop something. And then if you somehow run out of junk, you can't move for a turn, and your crew is very unhappy with you. It says that in the rules.
So I love the fact that somehow it ignores the fact that conservation of momentum means you would keep going once you established your motion.
True. That is true. It does not do that, but
so I'm now like imagining everyone is in some sort of a co-moving coordinate system, and they're simply changing their vectors compared to one another.
And it shows you, like when you're transitioning between the Earth and the Moon or Mars or whichever. And the distances are not accurate quite either. But it's when you're transitioning from one place to the other, you have to make the figure kind of this figure 8 roundabout pattern. You can't just make a 180-degree turn on a dime for no good reason and stuff like that. But it's not 100% accurate, but it's accurate enough to talk about a specific concept. And it's much better as a scientific game than sometimes some of the other ones, because sometimes the other games get way too bogged down in the technical and lose some of the fun because you're trying to figure out all the technical stuff as opposed to having fun and then learning from the fun.
Now, there's some games out there that look like you should be learning.
Mm-hmm.
They have names that imply you should be learning. And then no learning takes place. What are your favorite examples of things that have no learning but are nonetheless okay games, but not learning games?
So there are lots of space games that are not learning games. We played Space Base one time, I believe, which is
many times. I actually kind of like that game.
It's a great game. There's a story-based expansion that's come out called that relates to Pluto. I can't remember the name right now, but
adding to Amazon wish list.
I know a place where you can get these things.
Yes, but if I put them on my Amazon wish list, I will remember them.
That's true. And just remember, yeah. Anyway, I think it's like the emergence of Shy Pluto or something. It's got Shy Pluto in the name, but there is no learning in that game. That game is basically about the only learning in that game is probability curves on when you roll 2 dice and what numbers are more likely to come up if you roll 2 dice. And that's about it. Nothing about space. Let's see. There's so many games out there in general. Do you have an example that can also?
So I was thinking of Space Base.
Yeah, there you go. See, I recommend.
Other game. So Firefly is one that seems like you should be learning about economics,
mm-hmm.
but mostly you end up learning about space is empty. I seem to remember spending a great deal of time trying to get somewhere, and then like what I wanted wasn't there anymore.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to try and do just in general, it causes my brain to be full of hundreds to thousands of games, which is hard, but is to take into account who I'm playing with or who the target audience is. So if I'm playing with Pamela, I know Space Base works, and I know she can handle something with some level of complexity, but I'm probably not going to throw the game Dune at you. Because from what I hear, it takes, 6 6+ hours to play, and it's very rules heavy and this other, but there are other people that's what they love to do.
Right. Whereas I watch other people play Arkham Horror as a spectator sport.
Yep. So like there was at a convention, a game trade convention at one point, and I was at a table with someone, and they pulled out this game, and they said, okay, to play the first few rounds of it, it can take up to 4 hours. To play the whole game, it can take up some ungodly number. And this guy I was at the table with was so excited. I'm like, I don't know who to sell this to. So you have to know, like, who do they like those really heavy games, or do they like lighter games?
And there's the whole cooperative versus competitive.
Yes.
And there's games like Robo Rally is one that is really good at teaching basically programmatic thinking.
Yes.
While introducing the fact that sometimes processes collide. And this particular game, you're playing a little robot, and you get to look at your cards, and you have 7 slots so you can put 7 commands in, and your robot follows those commands. And there's conveyor belts and spinny gears, and if you land in different places, the board can interact with you. But there's other robots you're competing against, and they can shoot you, they can move you. And you never know what's going to happen to interrupt. There's a whole lot of, please don't shoot me involved. And then, oh no, you touched me. And you can add an interesting level of confusion by using unplayed pieces to randomly play. By having the deck just like automatically give those robots commands. And one time while playing this with 2 of our friends, Jamie and Sean, we created a murder bot. And this random deck of cards kept shooting us. And it turns out that random is not as random as you would think.
Yeah. Well, it's also, people tend to think that random is almost equally spaced, and it's not. Right. And that's one thing with cards. And you're talking about AIs in the board game. There's a trend now too of solo play. So having a way to play a game by yourself. And fundamentally what that means is you may be playing with cards and a board and that kind of stuff. But what you're really doing is playing with a somewhat randomized set of an artificial intelligence of the board game that you're fighting against. And so it's by shuffling the cards, it's doing these other things, but those designers are amazing because they have to balance all of this out and still make it fun for you when you're doing it.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing. I'm always impressed.
Yes. Now, what games are the newest games that you think everyone needs to consider for their, like when I was little, we always used to play board games on New Year's. Mm-hmm. And thank you, Group Proof, for tipping $100. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Group Proof is one of Laura and I's mutual friends, and he has actually been here before to help us out with these hangout-a-thons. You are missed, old friend. Thank you, Group Proof. I raise my coffee to you, and it is good coffee.
I just have a LaCroix. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Where is that? So my games for surviving the holidays is fundamentally, I think, the question you asked.
Yes.
And one of them I have right here, which I think if I hold this up, though, it's backwards. So that's not very helpful.
No. It works for us. It's only backwards to you.
Okay. So this says just one. So I can teach you how to play this game in about a minute.
Okay.
So this game has been going really well. My husband went to a game. So this couldn't order yet, and I needed it for an event. And my husband could only find it at one store that he went to several, and they had sold he got the last copy, and they had gotten 50 copies right before that. So it's a fully cooperative party game.
Okay.
So, yes. So what you do is you hold up a card like this that I wouldn't normally be able to see, and it has 5 words on it. Uh-huh. And so I would say something like the number 3, which says in this case, scale. Mm-hmm. Now, all the other players have these little whiteboard thingies. They just look like this. And they would write down one word that is related to scale. So you might say metric, and somebody else might say ruler, and somebody may say weight or something like that. The tricky bit is when, let's say you wrote down weight and somebody else wrote down weight. Well, now both of those get eliminated. So when I open my eyes, I see all of the remaining words that relate to scale. And I have to try and figure out or guess that word based off of what I see. But if people put down the same answer, those get eliminated and removed.
So you want to be as individual as possible.
But not too random that it's hard to figure out. So
it's the Dixit problem.
A little bit like the Dixit problem. But this one's completely cooperative, unlike Dixit. But yeah.
And I have to say, when you said scale, I went straight to musical.
See, there you go.
And I can just imagine the poor person who's confronted with weight, metric, and musical.
So we were playing yesterday with some people that you would know too. And we played, the question was boss. And somebody played various people. Some of us played names of people that we thought this person might associate with boss. And one person wrote Springsteen. And one person wrote administrator.
Oh dear.
So he ended up with administrator, a person's name, and Springsteen. And how the scoring works is you have a deck of 13 cards, and you're trying to get as high of a score as possible of those 13 as a group.
Yeah.
But if you guess wrong, then you take 2 cards out of the thing. So you basically lose 2 points. If you decide not to guess, you lose 1 point. And if you get it right, you get a positive point. Okay. So he decided not to guess because also he was Serbian. And so the concept for him of Springsteen as the boss isn't something that's going to necessarily come to mind.
Right. Meant nothing.
Nothing at all. And I played last Thursday. I've played this a lot in the last week. I played it on Thursday, and I had to guess a word, and all I could see was the words origami and Frasier. And I was sitting there, and it's like, okay, origami and Frasier. And you only get one guess. So, and then it's like, all right.
How was Frasier spelled?
Frasier, I think.
Okay. So it wasn't like the tree, it was like my co-host.
Yeah, it was like a Persian.
Yeah.
And see, you're going to go down, I think, I did figure it out, but you might go down a different route because of your co-host.
Right. Well, I first, when you went to Frasier, went to tree and then to paper. Mm-hmm. And that's not useful. And now that you said Frasier the person, I'm also not. Yeah. What was the answer?
Crane. As in like the bird crane, like an origami crane or Frasier crane.
But I hate everything. I have more coffee just out of reach. I can still hear you, but I'm about to step away from the camera because coffee.
Okay.
Please describe how you found this game, where people can find it, and how they might be able to find it with relation to you while I get the more coffee that's out of reach.
So I found this game through various podcasts. I think I heard it on a podcast. And then at a convention over the summer, some of our friends were playing it and having a lot of fun and talked about how even like at previous experiences, they were playing with it and somebody was just texting the clues onto somebody else who wasn't even there. And they were fundamentally playing the game without having to even be there. So that was pretty cool. And so You can probably find this game at your friendly local gaming store, which is usually where you want to go first. Help those small businesses out. If you're in the Maryland, DC area, you can email me at Laura at omnihedral.com, which is the OMNIHEDRAL.com. And I can see if I can hook you up. So, but it's a lot of fun. And then that one's a nice, somewhat simple game to play. Other games like you were talking about games to survive the holidays to some extent. Another one that I like to use with people who are not non-gamers to some extent, and to like, I've had non-gamers come up and say, or people who call themselves non-gamers, people who haven't played a lot, go, I just don't like games. I'm like, okay, I can find something you'll like. And so I often start with a game called Suro, Tsuro. And it's a game where you're given these tiles and you are trying to keep your little piece on the board as long as possible. So you're creating this path as you go along. But then you have to try and you can sometimes manipulate where other people end up going, and you want to keep yourself on the board, but drive other people off. And that one I have heard people playing with at least 3 generations, and with a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old won at least one game. So like you can play that with lots of different generations of people.
There's another one that's good for that. I'm going to mispronounce it probably. Ubungo. It's a German
I think that's
game.
about right.
And you get a card, and it has different complexities of problems on the front and the back, and you have a set of tiles, and the timer flips, and you have to complete it before the timer is over. And whoever completes their pattern first gets a chit. Mm-hmm. But it's another one of those multi-generational games because it's pure pattern recognition.
So, and thematically, to go with the Cosmo Quest, there's a game called Catch the Moon. That has, again, no educational value whatsoever. It has nothing really to do with the moon. It's basically you're putting ladders on top of this fake plastic cloud, and you roll the dice, and you have to put a ladder on either that only touches one other ladder, touches exactly 2 ladders, or is the highest piece in the chain. It's a dexterity game. But people tend to have a lot of fun with it because it's like almost a reverse Jenga where you're building things up as opposed to trying to take them out. And if you drop them, you get a chit that is a negative point because the moon is sad because you dropped the ladder. But we have had some very elaborate structures at the end of that game.
I love that. I love that. So in the chat we have Cthulhu Flux being mentioned, and while Cthulhu Flux has no science involved whatsoever, there are other versions of Flux that you might learn a few things, if only because of how you're laughing. Have you played any of the like Space Flux or anything like that?
So I have played many different versions of Flux. They are actually coming out this year with an astronomy Flux. There is also math Flux, anatomy Flux, chemistry Flux. So they have definitely. Then there's also Marvel Flux and Cthulhu Flux and Pirate Flux and Monty Python Flux.
Yeah.
But they're coming out this year with an astronomy Flux, and so you can. Usually they have them such you learn something as you go along. And Flux is an interesting game because the rules are always changing. I mean, it starts out with a draw 1 card, play 1 card rule, and then you play more rules. And that doesn't even tell you how to win because there's no win condition when you first start. And so the win condition changes as you go along and you play things in front of you. I believe the chemistry Flux is got one thing in it where you get like extra play if you can create a compound out of the elements that are in front of you. I've not seen anyone actually do that. So
CH4,
yeah.
I can imagine, like, there's some good organics if there's a correct proportion of hydrogen in the deck.
Yes. So, well, I think if you just said hydrogen and carbon in front of you, then you could do the CH4. So yes. So Astronomy Flux comes out this year, and I think they may have re-released the original Space Flux as well.
Cool. Was that
The
Starflux, I think?
Maybe, yeah. I think it's had a couple of different names. Starflux, I think, may have been more science fiction based at one time.
Okay.
Um, the company that makes the Flux is Looney Labs. They're actually in the greater Maryland, D.C. area, and Andy Looney and that's actually their last name, has a they used to work at NASA Goddard. And Andy worked on Hubble, and then they quit and started designing board games.
It's so the game Set, a good friend of the show, Llewellyn Falco, his mom was the one who developed
Oh,
Set.
fantastic.
And she was an academic who left academia to be a game designer. I just love that.
So I saw a comment in the chat, and I have to do a tangent story because I FIN FTW 101 says that Burns is an amazing last name for a rocket scientist. So, which is that. Thank you. But I have a funny story though too. I was working on an earlier project, and there was this guy that was a bit annoying, and we all didn't like too much. And I got an email from him, and the email, it was to a group of people, but including my managers. And the title of the email, the subject line was Attitude Adjustment for Burns. And I initially thought, oh my God, what did I do? Why am I in trouble? And then I start looking at the email, and it's like, oh, attitude adjustment for orbital burns.
It's the
Okay.
attitude as in the way it's moving.
Yep.
And I would have had the exact same response. And with the last name Gay, I've had no end of misadventures.
Yeah, that doesn't happen too often, but that one is like indelible in my memory of attitude adjustment for burns and what did I do wrong,
Yeah.
and am I in big trouble? Yes, I didn't get fired. It wasn't related to me at all.
Oh man. Oh man. Yeah.
So
I've got
yes.
nothing. I've got nothing.
So let's see. I will give you another game for the holidays that I have used. So there was a Christmas a few years back where I had my mother and stepdad. Gosh, I hope none of them hear this. And my in-laws were all there. I'm certain they won't hear it. But anyway, so it's like these heavy personalities around, and knowing what my father-in-law is like, I pulled out this game called Timeline, and all it is,
Oh
well,
yeah.
the base timeline is it's just a set of cards with an event on them, and on the other side it has the date. But you only look at what's on your side, and everybody's putting them on a common timeline. So you're trying to figure out if, for instance, Microsoft being founded happened before or after the invention of the concept of zero. That's fairly easy. But when you're trying to figure out when was the waistcoat invented versus like the vaccinations or like, I'm trying to remember one from the other day, like last time I played it, I was like, when was the waistcoat invented relative to the toothbrush? Like, is it before or after? And some of them just shock you because it's like negative numbers. It was like way before the concept of zero, at least by the creators of the game and what research they had. There is sometimes a slight issue depending on which version. There's a science and discoveries box for those. Unfortunately, most of the discoveries are the giraffe was discovered by the
Oh.
Europeans. or there's a whole bunch of them or when such and such was discovered, but it's always by the Europeans, which is not
Yeah.
great in that part. But overall, the game is fun. And then there's a timeline challenge version, which makes it a little bit easier because you're trying to pick eras and there's slightly different games as opposed to just putting stuff in order. But it's
So,
fun to do. And my father-in-law, who loves to read Wikipedia constantly, had a lot of fun with it.
so one of my favorite things to do in presenting astronomy news is when we learn certain facts, like such and such happened at such and such a time, look up what was happening on Earth back then.
Right.
And when New Horizons flew past Pluto a few years ago, we realized, wow, that world doesn't have that many craters on it. And that lack of craters implies that the surface of Pluto is fairly young. Something has happened to weather it, to refresh it, to change it. And we estimate that the surface of Pluto, at least this was the estimate at the time, for the younger regions, is no older than 50,000 years.
Oh, wow.
So I looked up to see what was new and novel on the planet Earth 50,000 years ago, and the answer was honeybees. And so, according to the fossil record, honeybees and the surface of Pluto are roughly the same longevity of when you have been able to find them in our solar system.
That's awesome. I also like doing things like if I've done a few talks on women in STEM or women scientists that we don't know that well, and putting them in making sure as part of whatever talk, I don't just talk about them. I talk about the context of what was going on. So I gave a talk once on Mary Somerville, and one of her she's in the UK, but one of her compatriots was Jane Austen, was writing and living at the same
Oh,
time.
wow.
And so, like, so you're thinking up in, I think Mary, I don't think they ever met each other, but that immediately, I could see by your reaction, put it in context on when this was happening and what it was
Yeah.
like when she was working. So not taking any almost event as much as you can out of the vacuum and saying, okay, I can see in my ancestry that this was happening. Why was this happening at this time? It's maybe because of war or this or that, or there was a drought and variety of things that cause people to move, or just put in context everything that's happening. I know I threw a lot of random bits out there, but it's because
No,
everything's
that's
interconnected.
so. One of my favorite school assignments was we were all handed 15 what appeared to be completely random people out of history and fiction, and we were assigned to come up with the best possible seating arrangement for a dinner party. And we would be graded based on our justifications for how we set people together. And going through and seeing how all of these people could interrelate was really kind of an amazing thing to get to do. So it was pleasing. It was very pleasing. Sorry, just catching up on
That's
the
okay.
chat.
Yeah.
I don't know why there's an exclamation mark question. Oh, Ready 409 wrote something.
Thanks for putting in the link for Timeline, ADV Addict. I did get back to see that.
So we have a science question coming in from Ready 409 of if we land on Mars, how do we get people back? There's no Cape Canaveral and no jet propulsion lab to rescue them. And this gets to the idea of to get back from Mars, we have to take our fuel and our rocket with us.
Yes.
And this is why we haven't brought anything back yet.
Yeah, and that it's always extra difficult. And I mean, I've heard this on a tour once from a friend of mine who was a docent. There has only been one single stage to orbit launch or launch vehicle in existence, and that was the lunar lander. because they could, their gravity was light enough that they could
Yeah.
but again, everything had to go with them. And so what is it like to take off from Mars, and impact? The one thing is we have NASA, and as part of that, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory on Earth that can help the people on Mars. They would need a launch site and a launch infrastructure as best as they need it, but they don't have as many people around, so they don't have to launch from the coastline like we do in the US. So there are benefits and stuff of having an unpopulated planet, but then there's also always those contamination concerns too. But
yeah.
I semi went on a random there, but again, yeah, either you have to make fuel on Mars, or you have to actively take it with you and then use that to help get yourself back.
And we are currently in planning missions, both sample return missions from Mars to just bring rocks back, and in thinking about how to get humans back, because we really don't like to kill humans.
No.
And leaving them on Mars definitely would kill them by one way or another. Let's not think too hard on that. But the ways that they think about to bring people back are you either launch a rocket just to take the return vehicle to Mars and leave it there.
Right.
Or you take the Elon Musk approach of you have a vehicle that can land on its butt and take back off, in which case you simply need to have a whole lot of fuel. And this is what they're looking to be able to do with Starliner. Not Starliner, Starship. And Starship, if they're able to get it working, will be able to do that land and take off and return to Earth from with lunar travel. We don't yet know what will be possible for Martian travel. Stores of Pretzi, I destroyed your name, I'm sorry, ask, can we simulate Earth's gravity in space? Oh, let us count the ways. Laura, you want to give a stab? You are the rocket scientist.
Well, it depends on how technical you want to get, whether or not a rocket scientist. But you can use, I mean, the biggest way to simulate gravity is momentum in one way or another. And so you can spin a module, you can spin your spacecraft, which causes that force to move down. And then the acceleration, like if you're accelerating your car real fast and you get thrown back, that's one way also that I've heard talked about for very long trips, is accelerate really fast one way, turn your ship around and decelerate at a certain speed, and that would simulate gravity as well. So those are the top two that come to my mind.
Yeah. And the space station that rotates is definitely a common idea. The spacecraft that rotates becomes a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Because you either have to counter rotate or something to get your stability correct. And right. That's a whole lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, and the other thing I don't know if people think too much about with you rotating spacecraft, again, they ended up, the axis ends up having to be really large. And then if you have like a wheel system, for example, or you don't make it large enough, let me just go that way. If you don't make it large enough, the feeling of gravity at your head and the feeling of gravity at your knees are going to be completely different, because they're one's further away, or one's closer to the center of the circle and then one's further away. And you don't want that to happen too much.
And it all comes down to building stuff like this. You're talking a really big space station, something like we might have read about in Ender's Game or seen on Babylon 5, seen in various other movies. You need something huge to get your head and your feet to have roughly the same gravity.
Yeah.
And our own space station took how many years to build?
Quite a few.
Like
decades?
Yeah, at least 2. I want to say they started it when I was in high school and finished it when I was done with grad school. Yeah.
In some ways, those are almost never. I mean, you can, if in low Earth orbit, you can never be finished too, because you can always add new modules on versus not too.
Right.
So when do you call the end date as well? Before it goes into Earth's atmosphere, but still.
Yeah.
But so yeah, there's lots of different aspects in all of this kind of travel. I get going into a tangent of science fiction. You talked about Babylon 5 and Ender's Game.
Yeah.
There's an older science fiction book called Ringworld.
Larry Niven.
Yeah, that just the concept of, and when you think about so basically, for those who are not familiar, is they built a world on a giant strip around a star. Or I guess it goes also with a Dyson sphere, but in a strip format. Is that right?
Yeah.
The right reference? But
Yeah.
so, but you have to think, to build something like that, you basically have to use all of the resources in your solar system to potentially build a giant strip around a star at an orbit that then is a continuous habitat for people. So if you think about it that way, there's a lot that goes into that.
And without meaning to, you just provided the best possible segue into our next segment.
There you go.
In the next hour, we will be joined by my co-host, my collaborator, my friend, Fraser Kane, who is going to be with me recording a live astronomy cast after a discussion about the weekly Space Hangout crew, which all of you need to join. It's free. It's awesome. These are the people we turn to for a whole lot of awesomeness. And during our episode, we are going to be discussing, and I'm going to destroy the pronunciation on this, Boyajian star, and I'm hoping Fraser knows how to pronounce it. This is commonly known as Tabby's star because Tabby is easy to pronounce, and it is named for Tabitha Boyajian, who is the discoverer, and this object has a really weird light curve. How its light changes over time is super weird, and it was actually originally put forward. Well, one of the ideas that we can't eliminate is that there is a ring world around this star.
Wow, that's awesome. That is a perfect segue there.
It really is. So I'm going to say, what parting words do you have for our audience?
I would say that while there is lots of fantastic science out there, there is lots of fun that you can do with it as well. So while you remember to learn things and to keep learning things, also remember to have fun as much as possible.
Exactly. That is a beautiful, beautiful thought. And where can people go to find all the amazing content that you create?
So I've been a bit lax on social media at the moment, but I have been known to be on Moon Ranger Laura is my Twitter handle. And then we're, over the course of 2020, going to be building up the Omnihedral content. So those are some of the easier places to find me.
That is awesome. It has been a pleasure having you, Laura, and
Thank you.
I look
Such a
forward
pleasure.
to seeing you soon.
All right. Take
IRL.
care. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.